I've been around long enough to notice something most folks never talk about. When someone we love is in trouble, real trouble, we do things that don't make sense. We knock on doors we'd never knock on. We ask strangers for help we'd never ask for. Desperation has a way of rewriting every rule we thought we knew. I saw that truth proven once, in a way I still can't fully explain. The cub stood in the middle of the dirt road at dawn. Ethan Cole slowed the Land Cruiser to a stop, his hands frozen on the wheel. 4 months old, maybe less, alone, and walking toward the vehicle instead of running from it. That was wrong. Every ranger knew it. Lion cubs didn't approach humans. They hid. They fled. They pressed themselves into grass and waited for their mothers to return. But this one kept coming. It stopped 3 meters from the bumper and opened its mouth. The sound that came out was thin. Broken, not the cry of a hungry animal, but something closer to a question. Its ribs showed through dull fur. Its eyes locked onto Ethan's face through the windshield and didn't look away. He reached for the door handle. If you're watching today, I'd love to know where you're joining from. Leave a comment and say hello. And if you've been enjoying these stories without subscribing, I hope you'll consider it. Your support means everything. The cub turned and walked into the grass. Ethan stood beside the open door of the Land Cruiser, watching the small tawny shape disappear into stalks that reached past his waist. Protocol was clear. Radio it in. Mark the location. Do not follow. But the cub stopped at the edge of the grass and looked back. This made no sense. 4 months old, maybe less, and it was leading a human somewhere instead of hiding. Something was very wrong. Ethan stepped off the road and followed. The grass closed around him within seconds, cutting off the vehicle, the road, the familiar world. Only the cub remained visible, a patch of gold moving 10 feet ahead, pausing every few moments to check that he was still coming. The smell hit him first. Copper, rot, something dying. His boots crushed dry stalks as he pushed forward, the sound impossibly loud in the morning stillness. Sweat prickled along his spine despite the cool air. The cub picked up its pace, crying in that thin, broken voice, leading him toward a shallow depression where the grass thinned and the red dirt showed through. He saw the flies before he saw her, a cloud of them, black and buzzing, hovering over something large and still. The lioness lay on her side in the dirt, her left foreleg twisted at an angle that made Ethan's stomach clench. Wire rusted, blood-crusted bit deep into the flesh above her paw. The wound had gone septic days ago. He could see bone through the swollen tissue. The cub ran to her side and pressed its small body against her flank. It licked her face, crying, pushing its head beneath her chin. She didn't move. For a moment, Ethan thought she was dead. Then her ribs expanded one shallow breath and her eyes opened. Yellow, flat, unblinking, fixed on him. His hand moved without thought, reaching for the pocket over his heart. The envelope was still there. His father's handwriting on the front, faded from months of carrying. He hadn't opened it since the funeral. The lioness watched him. Not with fear, not with aggression, with something else entirely. Something he recognized. The look of a creature that had stopped hoping for itself and started hoping for something smaller, something more important, something pressed against her side with its heart beating too fast. Ethan pulled the radio from his belt. His thumb found the transmit button, pressed down. Static crackled through the morning air, cutting through the buzz of flies and the cub's thin crying. "Station 7, this is Cole. I've got a situation about 2 clicks northeast of Checkpoint 7. Adult female lion. Wire snare on the left foreleg. Wound is infected, possibly septic. She's got a cub with her. Maybe 4 months old. I need a veterinary team out here now." He released the button. Waited. The radio hissed. Then Samuel Ochieng's voice came through, low and steady. "Cole, "What's your exact position?" Ethan gave the coordinates, reading them off his GPS. The lioness watched him the entire time, her eyes tracking his movements with the flat attention of something calculating whether he was a threat. "Copy that," Samuel said. "Stay with the vehicle. Do not approach. We'll send a team to assess." "Assess?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Sir, she's dying. The infection's been spreading for days. If we don't get Grace out here with surgical equipment—" "Cole," Samuel's voice cut him off. "Protocol is clear. We don't intervene in natural predator injuries unless there's evidence of human cause. There is human cause. It's a wire snare. Poacher work." Silence on the radio. The cub pressed tighter against its mother's flank, its small body trembling. "I'll send someone to verify," Samuel said finally. "But I need you back at the station by 0900. We've got a tour group coming through and I'm short-staffed." "Sir." "That's an order. Cole, return to station." The radio went dead. Ethan stood in the shallow depression, the device clutched in his hand, staring at the lioness. She hadn't moved. The cub hadn't moved. The flies kept circling, kept landing on the wound, kept crawling across exposed bone. You always did pick the easy way out. His father's voice. The last thing William Cole had said to him before Ethan hung up the phone. 14 days before the heart attack. 8 months before this moment. Standing in African dirt with a dying animal and a direct order to walk away. He turned off the radio. The click was small, almost inaudible. But it felt like something larger, a lock turning, a door opening, a line being crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Ethan lowered himself to the ground. The dirt was cool beneath him, still holding the chill of the night. He sat 3 meters from the lioness, close enough to see the individual hairs on her muzzle, far enough that she didn't tense or try to rise. The cub watched him with wide amber eyes. "I'm not leaving," Ethan said quietly. He wasn't sure who he was talking to, the lioness, the cub, himself. "Whatever happens, I'm not leaving." The lioness blinked, slowly, deliberately. Then her head lowered back to the dirt, and she closed her eyes. The cub took a step toward him. Ethan held still. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that a mother lion, even a dying one, could kill him in seconds if she perceived him as a threat to her offspring. But the lioness didn't move. The cub took another step, then another. It stopped just within arm's reach, its nose twitching, its ears swiveled forward. It stretched its neck and sniffed his hand, the one still holding the silent radio. Its whiskers brushed his knuckles. Its breath was warm, uneven. Then it turned and walked back to its mother, pressing against her side, and lay down in the dirt. Ethan sat there for a long time. The sun climbed higher. The air grew warm, then hot. Sweat soaked through his shirt and dried, leaving salt stains on the fabric. The flies kept buzzing. The lioness kept breathing shallow, labored but steady. The cub kept watching him with eyes that held something he couldn't name. He thought about his father. Not the arguments, not the disappointment, not the phone call. He thought about the letter, the one the nurses had found in the hospital's outgoing mail after William Cole died. The one his mother had sent to him 3 weeks later. Still sealed. With a note that said only he wrote this the morning before. "I thought you should have it." 8 months. He'd been carrying it for 8 months. Afraid to open it. Afraid of what it might say. Afraid it would confirm everything he already believed about himself. You always did pick the easy way out, but this wasn't easy. Sitting in the dirt next to a dying lioness, waiting for help that might not come, defying a direct order from the head ranger, there was nothing easy about this. Maybe that was the point. He reached into his vest pocket and touched the envelope. The paper was soft now, worn from handling. His father's handwriting was barely visible in the harsh African light. He didn't open it, not yet. A sound reached him from the east, faint at first, then growing. The low rumble of an engine. Tires on dirt. He turned and saw a dust cloud rising on the horizon, moving toward him, growing larger with every passing second. Someone else was coming. 2 vehicles emerged from the dust cloud. The first was a green Land Cruiser station issue, same model as Ethan's. The second was white with a red cross painted on the side. Medical? Ethan rose to his feet, his legs stiff from sitting in the dirt. The lioness lifted her head at the sound of engines, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't try to move. The cub pressed tighter against her flank. The vehicles stopped 30 meters out. Doors opened. Samuel Ochieng stepped down from the Land Cruiser first. 58 years old, close-cropped gray hair, deep-set brown eyes that had seen more death than most men could imagine. He wore his ranger uniform pressed and clean despite the heat, his boots polished, his rifle slung across his back. He walked toward Ethan without speaking. Dr. Grace Mwangi followed from the medical truck, already pulling on surgical gloves. She was shorter than Samuel, with dark skin and black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes swept over the scene, the lioness, the wound, the cub with the quick assessment of someone who'd spent 15 years performing field surgery on animals that could kill her. A third figure climbed down from the Land Cruiser's passenger side. Older, white-haired, stocky. He wore a faded blue shirt and carried a canteen in weathered hands. Tom Brennan. Ethan had seen him around the station, a volunteer from Montana, retired firefighter, widowed 2 years ago. He didn't speak much. Samuel stopped 3 feet from Ethan and looked at him for a long moment. "You turned off your radio," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." Samuel's jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck stood out like cords. For a moment, Ethan was certain he was about to be fired on the spot, sent back to the station, put on the next flight to Nairobi, shipped home to a country he'd spent 8 months trying to forget. Then Samuel looked past him at the lioness. Something shifted in the older man's face. The anger didn't disappear, but it moved aside, making room for something else, something older and heavier. "David," Samuel said quietly. "My son. 23 when he died." Ethan didn't move. "Poachers," Samuel continued. "He found them near the southern corridor. Should have called for backup. Should have waited." His eyes stayed fixed on the lioness. "He didn't." The cub made that thin, broken sound again. The flies kept buzzing. "I spent 12 years wishing he'd followed protocol," Samuel said. 12 years telling myself that if he'd just obeyed orders, he'd still be alive." He paused. "But I also spent 12 years knowing that I'd have done the same thing, and hating myself for never telling him that." He turned back to Ethan. "My son would have stayed," Samuel said. "My son would have sat down in the dirt next to a dying animal and refused to leave. And I never got the chance to tell him I was proud of that." His hand came up and gripped Ethan's shoulder. The grip was firm, steady. "Don't make me wish I'd said something different to you, too." He released Ethan and walked toward Grace, who was already crouching near the lioness with her medical kit open. Ethan stood there, unable to speak. His chest felt tight. The envelope pressed against his ribs, warm from his body heat. "You look like hell." Tom Brennan appeared beside him, holding out the canteen. His voice was rough, graveled by decades of smoke and shouting. His pale blue eyes had the look of someone who'd stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. Ethan took the canteen and drank. The water was warm but clean. "First field rescue?" Tom asked. No, but first one where I disobeyed orders to do it. Tom nodded slowly. That's the hard part. Not the dying animal, not the blood. The part where you decide your judgment matters more than the rules. He took the canteen back. My wife used to say that's what separates the people who make a difference from the ones who just follow instructions. Used to. Cancer. 2 years ago. Tom's face didn't change. Eleanor, 42 years married. Last thing she told me was to stop being so quiet. Said the silence was going to swallow me whole if I let it. He looked at Ethan with those flat blue eyes. Don't let the quiet win, he said. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you're not saying, don't let it eat you alive. The people we lose don't get to hear us anymore, but we still have to say the words. Before Ethan could respond, Grace's voice cut across the clearing. Cole, get over here. He walked to where she crouched beside the lioness. The animal's breathing had grown more labored, each exhale accompanied by a wet rattle that made Ethan's stomach clench. The wound looked worse up close, black blood oozing around rusted wire, flesh swollen and hot with infection. Wires embedded deeper than I thought, Grace said without looking up. I can remove it, but I'll need to debride the necrotic tissue and flush the wound before I can close. That's going to take hours, not minutes. What do you need? Someone to hold the surgical lamp steady while I work. Samuel's going to position the vehicles as a barrier, and Tom's gathering wood for a fire. She pulled a syringe from her kit tranquilizer. We're not going anywhere tonight. The cub watched from 2 meters away, its body trembling, its amber eyes fixed on its mother's face. Will she make it? Ethan asked. Grace inserted the needle into the lioness's haunch. The animal's muscles tensed, then slowly relaxed as the sedative took hold. That depends on how much fight she's got left, Grace said. She looked up at Ethan, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. You came to Kenya to disappear, didn't you? That's what Samuel told me. Quit your job at the zoo, left your family, flew halfway around the world 3 weeks after your father died. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. You're not the first person to run from grief, Grace continued, but you're here now, and that lioness is going to die if we don't save her. So whatever you're hiding from, whatever you're carrying in that envelope you keep touching, put it aside. I need you focused. I need you present. Can you do that? Yes. Good. She handed him the surgical lamp. Hold this steady. Don't let it waver, and don't look away when it gets ugly. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Orange light spilled across the savanna, painting long shadows through the grass. Samuel positioned the vehicles. Tom gathered firewood from the scattered acacia trees. The cub paced and cried and refused to leave its mother's side. And Ethan held the lamp, watching Grace's hands move with steady precision, knowing that somewhere out there in the gathering dark, eyes were watching them. The savanna didn't sleep. It just waited. Anything could be watching. The tranquilizer took hold in seconds. Grace pressed the syringe into the lioness's haunch, and Ethan watched the animal's muscles go slack, watched those flat yellow eyes drift closed, watched the massive body settle deeper into the red dirt as consciousness slipped away. Lamp, Grace said. Hold it steady. Don't let it waver. Ethan gripped the portable surgical lamp with both hands, angling the beam down onto the wound. His arms ached. Within minutes the light was heavier than it looked, and Grace worked with the slow precision of someone who refused to be rushed. The sun dropped toward the horizon. Orange light bled across the savanna, stretching shadows long and thin. The air cooled by degrees, but sweat still rolled down Ethan's spine, soaking through his shirt. Grace's hands moved without hesitation. She cut away dead tissue with a scalpel, the blade flashing in the lamplight. Black blood welled up from the wound. Old blood, clotted and thick. The smell hit Ethan's nostrils and he fought the urge to turn away. Wires embedded deeper than I thought, Grace muttered. She reached for forceps, probed the wound, and pulled. A thin strand of metal emerged, coated in tissue and pus. Poacher work, cheap stuff, cuts like a razor and rusts within days. The cub paced 10 meters away, crying in that thin, broken voice. It wanted to be closer. Every instinct screamed at it to stay beside its mother, but something fear of the strangers, perhaps, or some deeper understanding kept it at a distance. Grace worked for nearly 3 hours. She debrided necrotic tissue, irrigated the wound with saline, extracted 3 more fragments of wire that had broken off inside the muscle. When she finally began stitching, the light had faded to purple, and Ethan's arms burned like they'd been dipped in fire. "You can set it down," Grace said without looking up. "The worst is over." Ethan lowered the lamp. His shoulders screamed. His hands trembled. "Will she make it?" Grace tied off the last suture and sat back on her heels. Her scrubs were stained dark with blood. Her forehead glistened with sweat. "Lost too much blood to move her tonight," she said. "We camp here. If she's still breathing by morning, she's got a real chance." If she's still breathing by morning. The words hung in the air as the last light drained from the sky. They made camp in the growing dark. Samuel positioned the 2 vehicles to form a barrier, the green Land Cruiser on one side, the medical truck on the other, creating a rough semicircle around the lioness. It wouldn't stop anything determined to get through, but it might buy them seconds. Tom gathered wood from the sparse acacia trees scattered across the landscape. Dry branches. Mostly they'd burned fast but bright. Better than nothing. The fire crackled to life as true darkness fell. Flames painted orange light across the grass, pushed back the shadows, filled the air with smoke and heat. Ethan sat close to the blaze, watching sparks spiral upward toward stars that seemed impossibly bright. 3 cots had been set up in rotation, 1 for each watch shift. Samuel took first shift, positioning himself between the fire and the lioness with his rifle across his knees. Grace collapsed onto her cot without a word, asleep within seconds. The exhaustion of 15 years in bush medicine had taught her to rest when she could. Ethan couldn't close his eyes. He sat at the edge of the firelight, his back against the Land Cruiser's tire, and watched the lioness breathe. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Each breath seemed to take longer than the last, as if her body was forgetting how the cub had finally settled. It lay pressed against its mother's flank, one small paw resting on her shoulder. Every few minutes, it lifted its head and licked her face, a gesture so tender, so deliberate, that Ethan had to look away. The night pressed in around them. Beyond the firelight, the savannah was alive with sounds, rustling grass, distant cries, the endless chorus of insects that rose and fell like breathing. Africa didn't sleep. It just shifted gears. Ethan pulled the envelope from his vest pocket. His father's handwriting on the front, faded now from months of carrying. The seal still unbroken. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of whatever words waited inside. Read it. Tom had said, whatever's in it. The man who wrote it is gone. But you're still here. He tucked the envelope back into his pocket. Not yet. Not tonight. The fire popped. Sparks rose. The lioness breathed. Midnight came without announcement. Samuel appeared at Ethan's side, 2 tin cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one without speaking, then lowered himself to the ground with the careful movements of a man whose joints had started to protest. They drank in silence. The coffee was black and bitter, brewed strong enough to strip paint. It burned going down. But Ethan welcomed the heat. Above them, the stars blazed thick across the sky, more stars than Ethan had ever seen, even in the emptiest parts of Wyoming. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light, so bright it cast faint shadows on the ground. "David," Samuel said. The name came without context. Just a word dropped into the darkness. Ethan waited. My son. Samuel's voice didn't waver, but something in it had gone hollow. 23 years old when he died? The fire crackled. Somewhere in the darkness, an animal called a long falling note that faded into nothing. Poachers! Samuel continued. Ivory shipment crossing through the southern corridor. David found them setting up camp near the river. He should have radioed for backup. Should have waited for reinforcements. A pause. He didn't. Ethan's hands tightened around his cup. He tried to stop them alone. 4 men, armed. He had a pistol and a radio. The pistol jammed after 2 shots. Samuel's gaze stayed fixed on the fire. I heard the call come through, heard him asking for help, but we were too far. By the time I reached him, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. I'm sorry, Ethan said. I taught him to be brave, Samuel said quietly. Taught him to fight for what mattered, to stand up when others looked away. I forgot to teach him to wait, to survive. He set down his cup. 12 years. I've spent 12 years asking myself what I should have done different, what I could have said. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending sparks spiraling upward. You know why I didn't drag you back to station? Samuel asked. Ethan shook his head. Because David would have stayed. Samuel's voice cracked, just slightly. He would have sat down in the dirt next to a dying lioness and refused to leave. And I spent 12 years wishing I'd stood with him instead of following protocol. They sat in silence. The coffee cooled. The stars wheeled overhead in their slow turn. Sometimes rules protect us, Samuel said finally. Sometimes they just give us permission to look away. He rose, checked his rifle, and walked back to his position between the fire and the lioness. Ethan watched him go. This man who'd carried his son's death for 12 years, who'd built walls around his grief and called it duty. The envelope pressed against Ethan's chest. 8 months. 8 months of carrying words he was too afraid to read. He wondered how long a person could run before the running became all they knew. The laughter started around 2 a.m. Not human laughter, something wilder. Something that rose and fell in escalating whoops that echoed across the savannah like the cackling of the insane. Spotted hyenas. At least 4 of them. Circling just beyond the firelight. Ethan was on his feet before he fully registered moving. His heart slammed against his ribs. His hands reached for the rifle propped against the vehicle. Easy, Samuel said. He stood at the edge of the firelight, weapon raised, tracking movement in the darkness. They won't come into the light. Not yet. The laughter circled. Shadows moved in the grass low shapes, quick and fluid. Ethan could see eyes now, reflecting the firelight in pairs, yellow-green, hungry. Samuel fired once into the air. The shot cracked across the savannah, sharp as breaking bone. The laughter stopped. The shadows retreated, but they didn't leave. Ethan could still see them out there pacing, waiting, patient. They knew that they could smell the blood, the weakness. They understood that somewhere inside the circle of firelight lay something too injured to run. The lioness stirred, her head lifted an inch, nostrils flaring. A low sound rumbled in her chest, not quite a growl, but something close. Warning, defiance, the last protest of an animal that refused to surrender. The cub pressed tighter against her flank. Its small body trembled. Grace appeared at Ethan's side, checking the lioness's vitals with quick, practiced movements. She adjusted the IV line, examined the wound, listened to the animal's heartbeat with a stethoscope. She's fighting, Grace said quietly. Vitals are holding. That's more than I expected. Will the hyenas come back? They'll wait. Grace packed her equipment. They're patient. They know something's dying out here. They can afford to wait. She returned to her cot and lay down with her back to the fire. Within minutes, her breathing had slowed. Ethan stayed standing. The laughter had stopped, but he could still feel them out their eyes in the darkness, teeth in the shadows. The fire burned lower. Tom added more wood, and the flames leaped high again, pushing back the night. 4 in the morning. The eastern horizon had begun to gray, the first suggestion of dawn still an hour away. Tom took over the watch from Samuel. Settling into position with his rifle and a thermos of coffee that had long since gone cold, Ethan should have slept. His body ached. His eyes burned, but every time he closed them, he saw the cub walking toward his vehicle, heard that thin cry, felt the weight of trust he hadn't earned. Tom didn't seem surprised to find him awake. The older man simply nodded, poured coffee into a cup, and handed it over. "You got kids?" Tom asked. "No. Probably for the best. Hardest job there is." Tom pulled a worn photograph from his wallet, creased, faded, handled so often the edges had gone soft. A woman with silver hair, caught mid-laugh, her eyes crinkled with joy. Eleanor. 42 years married. 6 dogs over the decades. No children. She used to say the dogs were practice. Practice for what? For loving something that doesn't stay. Tom tucked the photo away with careful fingers. Everything we love leaves eventually. That's not the tragedy. The tragedy is if we stop loving because we're scared of the leaving. The sky lightened by degrees. Gray became purple, became pink. I said things to my dad. The words came rough, pulled from somewhere Ethan had kept locked for months. Before he died, told him he made me feel worthless, told him I was glad I'd never be like him. And now, I don't know what I am. Tom was quiet for a long time. The fire had burned down to embers, pulsing red in the pre-dawn darkness. My old man was hard too. Tom said finally. Hit me once for crying when my dog died, said men didn't cry over animals. Know what I thought when he finally passed? Ethan shook his head. Good riddance. Meant it too. At the time. Tom's voice was steady, matter of fact. Took me 20 years to understand I was wrong. 20 more to forgive myself for thinking it. Took me until Eleanor died to realize some things don't get fixed, they just get carried. The horizon turned gold. Somewhere, a bird called a long rising note that sounded almost like hope. Read the letter, Tom said. Whatever's in it, whatever he wrote the man who wrote it, is gone. Can't change that. Can't argue with it. Can't apologize. He paused. But you're still here. That's got to count for something. Ethan's hand moved to his vest pocket. The envelope was still there, warm from his body heat, soft from months of handling. What if he says I was right? Ethan asked. What if he says I was exactly the disappointment he always said I was? Then at least you'll know. Tom finished his coffee. Beats carrying a ghost forever. The sun broke the horizon. Light spilled across the savannah, turning the grass to gold. The cub stirred, lifted its head, and made that thin, broken sound. And that's when Ethan saw it. 30 meters out, barely visible in the tall grass. Something moved. Not a hyena, this was bigger, slower, flowing through the stalks with the terrible patience of a creature that had never needed to hurry. The python had found them. The python emerged from the grass like something poured from a bottle, 4.5 meters of scaled muscle. Its body thick as a man's thigh. Its head triangular and flat and utterly without expression. Nobody move. Samuel's voice cut through the dawn silence. He stood frozen, rifle half raised, calculating angles and distances. Grace had gone still beside the lioness, her hand resting on the animal's flank. Tom crouched by the dying fire, his face pale beneath the weathered tan. The python didn't hurry. It never needed to hurry. It had survived 60 million years by being patient, by waiting for the right moment, by understanding that weakness always revealed itself eventually. Its tongue flicked the air tasting, measuring, reading the chemical signatures of blood and fear and dying flesh that had been seeping into the ground for days. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. His breath came shallow and fast. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to climb into the vehicle, to put as much distance as possible between himself and this thing that moved with such terrible, unhurried purpose. The lioness couldn't run. The sedatives had worn off hours ago, but her body was too weak, too damaged, too drained of blood to do more than lift her head and watch. Her eyes tracked the snake's movement with the flat awareness of an animal that understood exactly what was coming. The cub pressed against her flank. Its small body trembled. Its ears flattened against its skull. 20 meters now. The python's scales caught the dawn light, glistening, wet with dew. Its body carved a path through the grass, leaving a trail of bent stalks behind it. "Can you get a shot?" Ethan whispered. "Not clean." Samuel's jaw was tight. "If I miss, it'll strike. If I hit wrong, same thing. Need a headshot at this distance, and that thing's moving too smooth." 15 meters. The python's tongue flicked again. Its eyes small, dark, set deep in that wedge-shaped head fixed on the lioness with the patient hunger of something that had never known fear. The cub made a sound. That thin, broken cry. The same sound it had made on the road. The same sound that had stopped Ethan's vehicle and changed everything. But this time, the sound wasn't asking for help. This time, it was something else. The cub rose to its feet. Every instinct in that small body should have screamed, "Run." 4 months old, maybe 20 pounds, built for speed and stealth, for learning to hunt at its mother's side, for growing into the apex predator that ruled these grasslands. Not for this, not for standing against something that could crush it in seconds. But the cub didn't run. It stepped forward 1 step, then another, placing itself directly between the python and its mother. Its legs shook so badly Ethan could see the tremors from 10 meters away. Its ears stayed flat. Its tail tucked tight against its hindquarters. It was terrified. And it didn't move. The python paused. Not afraid nothing frightened a snake this size, but confused. Calculating. Wild things ran, wild things hid, wild things did not plant themselves in front of certain death and refused to move. The cub opened its mouth and cried again. Not a roar, it was far too young for that, but something higher, thinner, a sound that wavered between defiance and despair, a sound that said, "I know I can't win. I'm staying anyway." Ethan's chest seized. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He could only watch as this small, shaking creature did something that made no evolutionary sense, that defied every survival instinct written into its bones. The cub was going to die. They both knew it. The lioness knew it. She was trying to rise, her damaged leg collapsing under her weight, her eyes wild with something that looked too much like anguish. The python began to coil. Its body drew into loops, muscles tensing, head pulling back into striking position. The cub didn't retreat, didn't flinch, just stood there, trembling, crying, refusing to abandon the mother who couldn't protect it anymore. Something cracked inside Ethan's chest, not his heart, something harder. Something he'd built over months and years, brick by brick, to keep himself separate from anything that could hurt him. The walls he'd constructed between himself and his father, between himself and his mother, between himself and anyone who might ask something of him that he wasn't sure he could give. The walls came down, and Ethan moved. "Cole, don't!" Samuel's voice cut off as Ethan lunged toward the fire. His hand closed around a burning branch, the end still glowing orange, Flames licking up the dry wood. The heat seared his palm. He didn't care. He was already walking, already moving toward the space between the cub and the snake. "Samuel, get ready," he shouted. The python's head swiveled toward him. Its tongue flicked. New threat, new calculation. Ethan stopped 3 meters away, close enough to see the individual scales, close enough to see the pale belly, the muscular coils, the flat stare of something that had outlasted dinosaurs. His arm shook. The torch wavered in his grip, throwing wild shadows across the grass. His legs felt like water. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Not here." His voice came out rougher than he expected, quieter, almost conversational. "Not today." The python held its coil. Its tongue flicked again, tasting the fire, tasting the fear, weighing risk against reward. Ethan didn't shout, didn't threaten. Just stood there, holding the burning branch between himself and the snake, betting everything on a simple calculation. Fire meant danger, and danger meant not worth the trouble. 5 seconds passed. 10. The python's muscles stayed coiled, ready to strike. Ethan could see the power in that body enough to crush a full-grown antelope, enough to break every bone in his torso before he could scream. "You always did pick the easy way out." His father's voice again. The last words. The ones that had followed him across oceans and continents and 8 months of running. But this wasn't the easy way. This was the hardest thing Ethan had ever done, standing still when everything in him wanted to flee, facing death for something that couldn't even say thank you. Samuel's rifle cracked. The shot exploded through the dawn air, aimed high and wide, not at the snake, but close enough to send the message. The sound split the silence like breaking glass. The python flinched. 15 seconds. The torch burned lower. The heat crept toward Ethan's fingers. The python's coils loosened. Slowly, almost reluctantly, its body unwound. It turned, that massive head swiveling away from Ethan, away from the lioness, away from the cub still standing frozen in the grass. It flowed back the way it had come. Within seconds, the grass had swallowed it whole, gone. Ethan's legs buckled. He dropped to his knees in the red dirt, the torch slipping from his fingers. His hand throbbed where the heat had burned his palm. His chest heaved. His whole body shook with the aftershock of adrenaline. Footsteps approached. Samuel. Grace. Tom. He could hear them talking, hear the relief in their voices, but the words blurred together into meaningless sound. The cub approached him. It moved slowly, cautiously, its body still trembling from the confrontation. It stopped a foot away and sniffed his hand, the burned one, the one that still smelled of smoke and charred wood. Then it pressed its head against Ethan's shoulder. Not gratitude, not thanks. Animals didn't work that way, but something else: recognition. Maybe acknowledgement. One creature that had stayed, touching another creature that had done the same. Ethan raised his good hand and placed it on the cub's back. He could feel its heart hammering beneath the fur faster than anything he'd ever touched. Wild with the terror, it hadn't let itself show. You were scared too, Ethan thought. You were scared, but you stayed anyway. The cub stayed pressed against him for a long moment. Then it pulled away, walked back to its mother, and lay down against her flank. Its eyes closed. Grace appeared at Ethan's side, grabbing his burned hand and examining it with clinical efficiency. Second-degree burns, superficial, mostly. You'll have blisters, but you'll keep the hand. She shook her head. You're out of your mind. Cole, absolutely certifiable. Is she okay? Ethan's voice came out hoarse. The lioness. Grace walked to the animal, checked the monitors, listened to her heartbeat with a stethoscope. Her face shifted through several expressions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been wonder. Vitals are stable. she said slowly. Actually, better than stable. Stronger than they were an hour ago. She looked at the lioness, then at Ethan, then back at the lioness. It's like she knew, like she was holding on for something. Samuel laid a hand on Ethan's shoulder. The grip was firm, steady. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Tom stood at the edge of the group, camera in hand. He'd been taking photographs Ethan hadn't noticed when documenting everything. Later, he would learn that Tom had sent one of those photographs to 3 newspapers and a wildlife magazine. The picture would go viral within days, a young man kneeling in the African grass. A lion cub pressed against his shoulder, dawn breaking behind them both. But that was later. That was a future Ethan couldn't see yet. Right now, he just breathed. The sun climbed higher. The savannah woke around them, birds calling, insects buzzing, the grass rustling in a wind that smelled of dust and smoke and something that might have been hope. Grace bandaged Ethan's hand with quick, efficient movements. "We need to transport her today," she said. "Get her back to the clinic. Start proper treatment. If she keeps improving at this rate, she's got a real chance. And the cub stays with her. He's too young to survive alone. But if she makes it—" Grace paused. "Well, we'll see." The vehicles were loaded, equipment packed. The lioness was carefully transferred to the back of the medical truck, still sedated, still breathing, still fighting. The cub refused to be separated. It climbed into the truck bed and settled against its mother's side with the stubbornness of something that had learned exactly how far it was willing to go. Ethan watched them drive away. His hand throbbed. His body ached. He felt empty and full at the same time, hollowed out and overflowing. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "That was something, son. That was really something." Samuel said nothing. He just nodded once, climbed into his vehicle, and drove after the medical truck. Ethan stood alone in the trampled grass. The fire had burned to ash. The sun beat down on his shoulders, and in his pocket, pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat, his father's letter waited. He reached for it. His fingers touched the worn paper. The seal was still unbroken. He wasn't ready, not yet, but soon. By noon, the Conservancy had transformed into something Ethan didn't recognize. Rangers arrived from other stations, men and women he'd only seen at monthly meetings, people whose names he barely remembered. Someone brought champagne. Actual champagne. Warm from the drive but fizzing when the cork popped. Handshakes came from every direction. Cameras flashed. Voices overlapped in a blur of congratulations and questions he couldn't follow. The man who stared down a python heard you didn't even flinch. Photographs already spreading. They're calling it. Ethan smiled when someone pointed a camera at him. He shook hands when hands were offered. His voice said the right things at the right times, but it sounded like it was coming from somewhere outside his body, a recording playing on a loop while the real Ethan stood somewhere else entirely. He'd risked his life. He'd saved the cub. He'd done the brave thing. So why did he feel like a fraud? The champagne tasted flat. The handshakes felt like obligations. Every time someone called him a hero. The word landed wrong, like a coat that didn't fit. Like praise meant for someone standing behind him. He slipped away while the celebration continued, found his way to the edge of the compound, behind the storage shed, where the noise faded to a distant murmur. His burned hand throbbed inside its bandage. His body ached from 2 days without rest. Tom found him there, staring at the horizon without seeing it. "You look like a man who just realized winning doesn't fix anything." Maybe it doesn't. Ethan pulled the envelope from his pocket. His father's handwriting on the front, faded and soft from 8 months of carrying. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, the terrible possibility contained in those sealed pages. I can't open it. Why not? Because what if he says I was right? The words came out cracked, broken in the middle. What if the last thing he wrote is proof that I was exactly the disappointment he always said I was? What if there's nothing to forgive because he never wanted to forgive me in the first place? Tom didn't answer. He just stood there, weathered face unreadable, giving Ethan the silence to hear his own words echo back. They sounded pathetic. They sounded like excuses. They sounded like a coward. That night, alone in his tent, Ethan came apart. It started small, a tremor in his hands as he pulled off his boots, a tightness in his chest that wouldn't ease. He sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the envelope, and the tremor spread to his shoulders, his jaw, his whole body. Not grief. He knew grief. He'd been carrying grief for 8 months, and it sat in his chest like a stone, heavy but manageable. This was something else. This was shame. The phone call played in his head. Not fragments anymore, the whole thing, every word, in perfect clarity. I don't understand why you won't even consider it. The store's been in this family for 3 generations. Because I don't want it. Dad, I never wanted it. You never wanted anything that required you to stay in one place, did you? Always running, always finding something more important than your own family. At least animals don't make me feel like a failure every time I walk in the room. Silence on the line. His father's breathing. Then, quieter than Ethan had ever heard him. Then maybe you should have stayed at the zoo and never come home at all. Ethan had hung up. His father had called back twice. Ethan hadn't answered. 14 days later, William Cole was dead. The envelope burned in Ethan's hands. He threw it across the tent, a violent motion, arm snapping forward, the paper hitting the canvas wall and falling to the dirt floor. He retrieved it, smoothed it, held it again, threw it again, the third time sauté. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at it lying there in the dust, his father's handwriting face up, accusing him. You ran. The handwriting seemed to say, you always ran, and now you'll never know what I wanted to tell you. The crying started in his chest, a pressure building behind his ribs, too big to contain. His face twisted, his eyes burned, and then it broke through, and the sounds that came out of him weren't anything he recognized, not dignified tears, not the quiet grief of a grown man mourning his father. This was ugly, the raw, heaving sobs of a child who'd skinned his knees and didn't know how to make it stop. Snot ran from his nose. His mouth hung open, gasping for air between the convulsions. His whole body shook. 31 years old, on his knees in a canvas tent in Kenya, crying like he hadn't cried since he was 6 years old and his dog got hit by a car and his father had said, "Men don't cry over animals," and walked away. He'd spent his whole life trying to prove his father wrong about him, and he'd failed. He'd failed, and his father had died knowing it. And now Ethan was kneeling in the dirt 8,000 miles from home, sobbing over a letter he was too much of a coward to open. The tent flap rustled. Ethan's head snapped up. Grace stood in the entrance, her silhouette backlit by the compound lights. She took in the scene without comment, the red eyes, the wet face, the crumpled envelope in the dust, the man on his knees with snot on his upper lip. She stepped inside and sat down across from him. She didn't offer comfort, didn't look away, just waited. "My mother died when I was 19, she said finally. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. Last thing I told her was I wished she'd never had me. I was angry about something stupid, a boy, maybe, or a grade. I don't even remember what started it. But I remember her face." Ethan wiped his nose with the back of his hand. The gesture felt childish. He didn't care. "Took me 10 years to forgive myself." Grace picked up the envelope from where it lay in the dust. She smoothed the creases, brushed off the dirt, and held it out to him. You know what finally did it? I realized she'd already forgiven me, before I even said it, because that's what parents do, the ones worth anything. You didn't know my father. No. Grace stood, her knees popped. She paused at the tent flap, half turned, her face in shadow. But I know you, and whatever you said to him, you just faced down a 4-meter python for something that can't even say thank you. A pause. That's not a man who deserves to carry this much shame. She left. The tent flap fell closed behind her. Ethan sat in the silence, the envelope in his hands. His face was sticky with tears. His nose still ran. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean, empty in a way that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. He looked at the envelope, at his father's handwriting, at the seal that had stayed unbroken for 8 months. Read it, Tom had said. Whatever's in it, the man who wrote it is gone. But you're still here. Ethan's thumb found the edge of the seal. He pressed down. The paper tore. The paper shook in his hands. Ethan pulled the folded sheets from the torn envelope, his fingers clumsy with exhaustion and something else, the same tremor he'd felt standing in front of the python. The same certainty that whatever came next would change everything. Nobody was watching. Nobody would know if he put it back, sealed it with tape, pretended he'd never looked. He could carry it another 8 months, another 8 years. He could bury it in the savannah and let the termites have it. But the cub had stood in front of a snake that could have killed it in seconds. The cub had stayed. Ethan unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky, not his father's usual cramped precision, but something looser, weaker, written on hospital stationery, the kind with a small blue logo in the corner. His father must have gotten the paper from a nurse, must have asked for a pen, must have known, somehow, that time was running out. Dear son, started this letter 6 times. Threw away 5. Your mother keeps telling me to just call, but we both know how that goes. We talk, we fight, somebody hangs up. Been like that since you were 16. I used to think it was your fault. You were too soft, too stubborn, too different from me. I couldn't understand why you'd want to spend your life with animals instead of people, why you'd choose a zoo over the business I built with my own hands. I told myself you were wasting your potential. Told myself I was just trying to help. But I'm lying in this hospital bed, and the doctors are using words I don't like, and I've got nothing to do but think. And what I keep thinking is this: I was scared. Scared you'd leave and never come back. Scared you'd build a life somewhere I couldn't reach you, with people I'd never meet, doing things I'd never understand. So I pushed. I criticized. I told myself I was toughening you up, preparing you for the real world. Truth is, I was just a coward, too proud to say I loved you. Too stubborn to admit I was wrong. Your mother tells me you're working at a zoo now, says you're good at it, says the animals trust you. I don't know why that surprises me. You always did have a way with things that couldn't speak for themselves. Even when you were a boy, you'd bring home every stray cat, every injured bird, every creature that needed someone to see it. I used to think that was weakness. I was wrong about that too. I'm proud of you. Ethan, I should have said it 1,000 times. Every time you graduated, every time you got a promotion, every time you called home and I found some reason to criticize instead of congratulate. I should have said it, and I never did. But I'm saying it now, because I don't know if I'll get another chance. Whatever happens to me, don't leave your mother alone too long. She's stronger than she looks. But she's going to need you. Visit when you can. Call when you can't. Don't let the distance turn into a wall the way it did between us. And don't spend your life running from words you should have said, the way I did. That phone call, I know you're carrying it. I know you think you said something unforgivable. But here's the thing. Son, I've said 100 things to you that were worse. 1,000 things. and I never apologized for any of them. So let me start now. I'm sorry. For the store. For the pressure. For making you feel like you had to choose between being my son and being yourself. For every time I made you feel small when I should have made you feel seen. I love you. I always did. I'm sorry I made it so hard to believe. Dad. P.S. Your mother says there's a wildlife program in Kenya that takes volunteers. She showed me the website. Looks like the kind of place you'd thrive. If things don't work out at the zoo, maybe give it a look. Just don't forget to write home. Ethan read the letter 3 times. The first time, the words blurred together, swimming through tears he didn't bother to wipe away. The second time, certain phrases caught. I was scared. I was wrong. I'm proud of you, and he had to stop, had to breathe, had to let them settle before he could continue. The third time, he read slowly, carefully, hearing his father's voice in every sentence, not the harsh voice from the phone call, the other one, the quiet one, the one that had read him bedtime stories when he was 5, that had taught him to ride a bike at 7, that had driven 8 hours to watch his college graduation and never mentioned the trip once, the voice of a man who didn't know how to say what mattered. Until he did. Ethan folded the letter and pressed it against his chest. His breath came ragged. His face was wet. But something had shifted inside him, something that had been locked tight for 8 months, for years, for as long as he could remember. He hadn't opened the letter because he was afraid of what his father thought of him. He'd been afraid of what he thought of himself. But his father had forgiven him. Before the phone call, before the argument, before any of it, his father had loved him through every failure, every disappointment, every moment when Ethan had chosen to run instead of stay. And now it was Ethan's turn. He stood. His legs were stiff, his body aching from 2 days without rest. The tent felt smaller than it had before, too small to contain what was happening inside his chest. He walked out into the night. The compound was quiet. Most of the rangers had returned to their stations. The celebration had ended hours ago. Only a few lights burned in the windows of the clinic, where Grace was monitoring the lioness through her first night of recovery. Ethan walked to the edge of the compound, where the buildings gave way to open savanna. The stars blazed overhead, the same stars his father had taught him to name when he was a boy, lying on a blanket in the backyard in Wyoming. He pulled out his phone. The screen glowed in the darkness. His mother's number sat at the top of his contacts unchanged for years, unanswered for months. His thumb hovered over the call button. The phone rang 3 times. Ethan! His mother's voice, thick with sleep, sharp with hope. Ethan! Is that you? Hey, Mom! His voice broke on the second word. Yeah, it's me. They talked for an hour, maybe longer. He told her about the lioness, the cub, the python. He told her about the letter. He told her things he should have said months ago, years ago, things that had been building up inside him since he was 16 years old. And she listened, the way she always had, the way he'd forgotten she could. When he finally hung up, the eastern horizon had begun to lighten. Dawn was coming. A new day. He walked toward the clinic, his steps lighter than they'd been in months. Through the window, he could see Grace checking monitors, adjusting IV lines. And beyond her, barely visible in the dim light, something moved. The lioness was lifting her head. Over the following 2 weeks, the lioness fought her way back. Ethan watched it happen in pieces the first time she lifted her head without trembling, the first time she stood on all 4 legs, the first time she walked the length of her enclosure without collapsing. Grace monitored every change, adjusted medications, cleaned the wound as new tissue grew over what had been exposed bone. The cub never left her side. It slept pressed against her flank every night. It followed her every movement during the day. When she stumbled, it pressed its small body against her leg as if trying to hold her up, When she rested, it lay with its head on her shoulder, watching the door, watching for threats that never came. The morning of the release. Ethan stood at the clinic window with coffee cooling in his hands. Grace appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. Vitals are strong, wounds healing clean. She's ready. And the cub stays with her. He's old enough to start learning to hunt now, if she can teach him. Grace paused. Well, they've got a chance. The transport vehicle stopped at the edge of the reserve, near the place where Ethan had first found them. The grass stretched gold and endless in every direction. The morning air smelled of dust and heat and something clean. Grace opened the back of the truck. The lioness stood inside, the cub pressed against her flank. She stepped down slowly, testing the healed leg. It held. She took another step, then another, moving toward the tall grass with the careful deliberation of something returning home. The cub bounded ahead, then circled back, then bounded ahead again, too young to contain its energy, too relieved to stay still. At the edge of the grass, the lioness stopped. She turned and looked back at Ethan. Not gratitude. Animals didn't work that way. But something else, recognition. Maybe acknowledgement. The flat, yellow eyes held his for a long moment. And then she turned and walked into the grass and was gone. The cub didn't follow immediately. It stopped at the grass line, sat down on its haunches, and stared at Ethan. The same eyes that had found him on the road 3 weeks ago. The same thin cry that had changed everything. But it didn't cry now. It just looked at him. Something passed between them, silent. Impossible to name. A creature that had asked for help, looking at the creature that had given it. A moment of connection that defied everything Ethan had learned about the distance between species, the impossibility of communication, the walls that separated human from animal. The cub held his gaze for 5 seconds. 10. Long enough that Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something settle into place that had been broken for a very long time. Then the cub rose, turned, and disappeared into the grass after its mother. Gone. Ethan stood there, watching the stalks sway where they had passed. The sun climbed higher, warming his shoulders, burning off the morning chill. Samuel appeared beside him. Not running. Ethan turned. The older man's face was unreadable, but something in his eyes had softened. No, Ethan said. No more running. Samuel nodded slowly. Good. Because I've got a position opening up. Senior Ranger. More responsibility. More time in the field. He paused. Thought you might be interested. I am. You'll need to call your mother first. Tell her you're staying. Ethan smiled the first real smile he'd felt on his face in months. Already did. Last night. She said she'd visit in the spring. Spring's a good time here. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. The cubs are usually born by then. Plenty to see. He walked back toward the vehicles, leaving Ethan alone at the grass line. Tom stood by the medical truck, camera in hand. He'd been taking photographs again, the lioness stepping down, the cub's final look, the moment of release. More images to add to the collection that had already spread across 3 continents. That photograph, Tom said. The one from the python. It's everywhere now. Newspapers, magazines, websites. They're calling you the Lion Whisperer. I didn't whisper anything. No. Tom lowered the camera. You just stayed. Sometimes that's enough. He climbed into the truck and closed the door. The engine started. Ethan watched them drive away at Grace. Tom, the empty transport vehicle. He was alone now, standing at the edge of the wild, the grass swaying in a wind that smelled of dust and distance and possibility. He pulled out his phone and looked at it. His mother's number, his father's letter. Folded in his pocket, the life he'd left behind, waiting for him to decide what came next. He'd told his mother he'd visit in December, maybe stay through Christmas, maybe longer. There was nothing waiting for him in Wyoming except memories. But memories weren't nothing. They were the foundation of everything, the weight that kept you grounded, the roots that held you in place when the wind tried to blow you away. His father had known that, had written it in the letter, in the words between the words. Don't let the distance turn into a wall. Ethan put the phone away. He took one last look at the grass where the lioness and her cub had disappeared. Then he turned and walked back toward the compound, toward the life he was finally ready to build. The sun climbed higher, the grass swayed. And somewhere, out there, hidden in the endless gold, a mother and her cub walked on together, alive, home. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles after a story like this one. It sits somewhere in the chest, between the ribs, not asking to be named or explained, just present, just there. Many of us have carried letters we were afraid to open. Some of us have said words we couldn't take back to people who left before we found the courage to try. Perhaps you know what it feels like to love someone across a distance that has nothing to do with miles, to hold on to something heavy because putting it down feels like letting go of the person who gave it to you. These things don't always resolve. They don't always heal the way we hope, and that's all right. Some weight is meant to be carried until we're ready to set it down, and some doors stay closed until the moment we find the strength to reach for them. There's no rush. There's no deadline. The people we've lost aren't keeping score. It's okay to sit with this for a while. It's okay to let it rest. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.